Yeah, real life.
in real life.
Thank God it's different. I'm sorry, guys. Did I mess anything up?
Hello, hello, hello. Testing, testing. Should have, oh, there you go.
Hello.
Is that a good volume?
Sorry, guys. Okay. Okay. Hi guys, thank you everyone for coming today. So today we are welcoming the Palestinian Youth Movement and the New York chapter. PAC is very excited to be working with PYM. Earlier this year, we really wanted to partner up more, and this teacher is just one of many ways which we're trying to do that. So about PYM, just a little bit. PYM is a transnational independent grassroots movement of young Palestinians in Palestine and in exile worldwide as a result of the ongoing genocide by Israel and the Zionist state and colonization and occupation of our homeland. I know that they're going to introduce themselves a little bit more, but PYM is doing great things nationally as well as our New York chapter, and we're very excited to have them today. Before we begin, I just want to start us off with a discussion with a few community guidelines. So I just want us all to be aware of our space and how much space we take up. In other words, just be conscious of how much you're speaking or holding yourself or presenting questions. So we have Lamis and I'm both presenting for us today. They'll talk a little bit more, but they'll be giving you opportunities to speak and they'll ask if you have questions. But we just want to hold off on any further or more detailed questions until they tell you or at the end. Also, if you came in a little later, we do have a sign-in sheet at the front so you can get all of PAC's events and notifications. We'll talk more about them after the event, but we are very excited to have them for a history presentation today. Thank you.
Hi everyone. We're very, very excited to be here with you. Like Russell said, we're the Palestinian Youth Movement New York City chapter. Can everyone hear me okay? And if I get too loud, also let me know. But we're very excited to be here. The PYM has been working in a lot of ways to mobilize and politicize Arab and Palestinian youth, especially knowing that so many of our institutions and organizations have been purposely demolished and taken away from us. And so it's particularly important and valuable to us to be here in PAC, especially where it feels like really we are rebuilding our institutions. We are working to reclaim that rich history of struggle and resistance that has been stripped of us as Palestinians living in diaspora and Arabs and others. And so we do this through political education events like this. We do this through protests in the streets. We do it through our work in resistance arts and cultural cultural resistance, and a lot of different events that we hope to have throughout the year and hope to engage with the community and throughout the year. So I'll pass it to Nai.
Hi everyone, I'm Nai, and yeah, just a little bit more about the PYM, our vision, and the PYM. We uphold the right of Palestinians to resist colonialism and domination, and to resist racist occupation. And we reject the framing that reduces Palestinians just to victims of colonial violence. And we also see that our role here in the diaspora or the far diaspora is really important, especially here in the United States, that is playing an active role, orchestrating this genocide, funding this genocide, giving cover for this genocide, and for the many decades before, not just right now. The PYM has chapters all across North America. We have 14 chapters, and in Canada as well, the UK more recently, and Italy. So yeah, it's really exciting to see you all here today. Hopefully we can kind of talk afterwards as well. And with that, we called it a brief history of Palestine. Hopefully it feels pretty rich. There's a lot to cover, as you all know, and I'm sure a lot of it will be stuff maybe you've learned before, heard before. So we're trying to present it in a kind of consolidated way. So I'll start off with a bit of a grounding us in what's happening right now. Today we're the 64th day of this brutal assault on Gaza, on the genocide of our Palestinian people. And since October 7th, there's been over 18,000 Palestinians who've been martyred, and many more still remain under the rubble, almost half of which are children. And this also doesn't include the tens of thousands that have been injured, many badly wounded, amputated, have been orphaned, lost their homes entirely, in their entire areas that they grew up in. And every 5 minutes, there's a martyr. In the West Bank as well, this is not just in Gaza. In the West Bank, there's been, to this day, over 270 Palestinians who've been martyred, mainly youth, as they resist the occupation. And at the same time, the Zionist entity is carrying out mass arrests across Palestine, adding to the already hundreds of administrative detainees. It's around actually 10,000 at this point. And this doesn't include the thousands of Palestinian workers from Gaza who were kidnapped on October 7th and detained and held indefinitely without knowing, what's happening with their families, having no contact, and held in very brutal situations and conditions. In Gaza as well, we have seen over thousands of tons of bombs dropped on entire residential complexes, on mosques, on schools, on telecommunications lines. We've seen throughout the past 2 months multiple days where there's been total blackouts. This was a statistic of over a month ago that the tonnage of bombs dropped on Gaza is more than the nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that was almost a month ago. So I don't even know what it is right now. And at the same time, there is a total blockade on the entry of the necessary medical and humanitarian aid needed. There's an orchestrated mass starvation happening, and at the same time that they continue to bomb the south and supposedly safe areas. This is something you probably all know, if you've been following the news, but we think it's important to ground us in this, to kind of, show the long durée of the history that we're about to go into, how we've had 100 years of violent colonial occupation, but there's also been 100 years of Palestinians resisting, 100 years of Palestinians struggling and living, and that will continue until Palestine is inevitably free. So a little bit about this moment also, the other side is that it's kind of revealed to us what we've all known to be true, which is that the people of the world, the free people of the world, stand with Palestine. You know, we see this in the streets, we see this all over the world, we see this on social media, even though there's, you know, concerted attempts to censor, you know, in all different ways. And we see that this is a struggle for all revolutionaries, you know, whether or not the Palestinians, because of the way that Zionism and imperialism, which we'll get into a bit more in a bit, how they function to sustain, you know, structures of oppression all over the world. And that's why we say that Gaza and Palestine will liberate us all, because we know that the liberation of Palestine necessitates dismantling all of these oppressive structures, and that will happen. And so, yeah, with that, I'll let Lamise kind of get into a general objectives and overview of our presentation before we get into it.
Okay. Yeah, and as I said, you know, there's a lot to cover, and we don't expect to go into detail with everything. And we also know that you all bring a lot of knowledge as well, and we're all learning together as we go through this. So we just want to remind us all of that. We're by no means experts on any of this stuff, and are learning every day as well. And so with that in mind, you know, the three kind of key things we want to cover through here is to understand the relationship between Zionism and imperialism, to think through some of those oppressive structures that I was just mentioning, and then to historicize the Zionist project to understand its genocidal nature. Because it's by definition a genocidal project, and we're witnessing that in Gaza today, but it's not limited to this current moment. And so we're reviewing our history in order to better understand that and to better equip us for how to be ready for the struggle in the future. And then finally, also to understand what Palestinian resistance has looked like over the past 100 years. And so with that in mind as well, just a question to the crowd, like what do we usually hear is like the issue? What's the like mainstream media or kind of like simple, you know, argument that people throw out there about like why what's happening in Palestine is happening? People can raise hands or. Yeah.
Because of Hamas.
Okay, because of the resistance because of Hamas. Okay. What else? Like, what's but even like the 100 years of struggle? Yeah.
Usually understood as a religious struggle.
Yeah, it's a religious struggle. Yeah. Okay. What else? Anything else? Yeah.
I've heard it continuously dismissed by the fact that it's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's way too complicated. Right. Okay. All good answers. Yeah, and so these are some of the things that like it's our responsibility and it's our role to show why those things are not, you know, are not the reasons that you know, what's happening in Palestine is happening, but it's also not something we're going to settle for, right? And that we need to better dig into these things and to understand our history and our struggle, and again what that means for all oppressed peoples of the world. And so, you know, the framework we want to look at instead is a materialist framework, meaning we actually want to look at the conditions and actually look at, you know, what has been happening on the ground and what is continuing to happen and whose interest is it serving, right? So that we can fully understand the bigger picture here. And so through this, we can understand the objective reality, both historically and today in Palestine, and also understand the resistance in the Palestinian and Arab masses as historical agents in this struggle. And we can only understand that through thinking about it as a struggle between colonized people and their colonizer. And so one more question before we move on, but in thinking about this history, what's usually like the date that we're told is like the start of the Palestinian issue or conflict?
October 7th.
1948, October 7th, okay. 1948, yeah, so yeah, exactly, right? It's like it started 2 months ago, or it only started in 1948. All of a sudden, spontaneously, you know, the Zionist entity was created and there was mass expulsions of Palestinians, right? But we know that that's not true. There's actually a rich history before that, showing the Zionist ideology and where it stems from. So that's what we're going to start with first.
Yeah, and so this history to me is really interesting because like in college even I didn't learn some of this history. You know, you learn a little bit of 1917, the Balfour Declaration, and then you skip straight to 1948, and it kind of mystifies the Nakba, it mystifies how the Zionist entity even came about, and mystifying it makes it harder for us to understand how to dismantle it. So actually understanding, you know, what mechanisms came in place, which kind of brings us to, you know, the relationship between Zionism and imperialism, which is a really long and intimate relationship. So, you know, many of us, we know 1948, the Nakba, the catastrophe, when over 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully driven out of Palestine. And we know 1917, the Balfour Declaration, when the British Empire promised the creation of the Jewish homeland in Palestine. So these two dates, 1917 and 1948, they narrate a story of Palestinian defeat and dispossession, of having their land signed away by the British Empire and then forcibly being removed from the land by the Zionist colonialists. Of course, we're not here to dispute these historical facts. Instead, what we're hoping to do here is kind of answer what happened between 1917 and 1948 to frame the kind of the foundations that were built, that were set in place to, you know, allow for the formation of the Zionist entity in these 31 years. And in these 31 years, the British Empire played a huge role. And there was the Palestinian resistance, which you know, we actually don't hear a lot about. I mean, how many of you, maybe I'm wrong, how many of you have heard about the Great Peasant Revolt or the Great Arab Revolt of 1936? Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's good. It's not too much talked about, even though it was, you know, one of the largest, if not the largest, anti-colonial uprising of that period of British colonial rule, you know, across all of their colonies. And so in this session, we aim to generally correct the omission of history by focusing on the resistance, imperialism, and colonialism during the British occupation of Palestine. And this is important to us as the Palestinian Youth Movement because we believe that it's important for us to study and teach the history of the resistance before the Nakba for many different reasons. The first one is because we're committed to doing so as it shows that Palestinian history does not begin with catastrophe, but rather our history is marked by 100 years of struggle, over 100 years of struggle, and against colonialism and imperialism, and that you cannot separate the two historically or currently. And then also because this history demonstrates to us that the Zionist entity was not inevitable, and its continued existence is not inevitable either. So, so in order to get into this, we want to ask, you know, who are the forces of reaction? Who are the forces that are oppressing the Palestinian struggle, the Palestinian people? We need to know who our enemies are. And so in order to narrate a history, a revolutionary history of the Palestinian struggle, we want to know who the enemy is. We need to know who the Palestinians are struggling against and what is happening in this time. Because we can't understand the terms of our people's national liberation struggle without identifying these forces of reaction or these enemy forces. Yes. So the first one, so during this time period, between 1917 and 1948, the Western countries were trying to establish their dominance and vying for world power. So we see this process where European states and empires were dividing up the global south in order to expand economic power and political domination through many means, such as extraction of resources, stealing oil, stealing stone, labor, the theft and exploitation of labor, and military occupation in order to achieve these goals. And this is essentially the process of Western imperialism. It's countries trying to expand their political and geographical domination, all in the pursuit of economic and material gain. And so the British want a piece of Palestine. And so we see the birth of the British Mandate of Palestine. And Palestine was colonized after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And we'll actually get into a second, why Palestine is important to the British and then important to the Americans and important strategically. And oh yeah.
So yes, so really quickly, throw out some ideas about why would the British be interested in Palestine?
Well, it's geographically in the smack down middle. It's the connection between Asia and Africa, and it's also it's in the smack down middle of the Arab world where you have the Gulf and then you have North Africa, and it's kind of a way to kind of destabilize and control the region.
Exactly, perfect. Yeah, so it's their gateway to Asia, the region, the Middle East region, and plus one more thing.
Resources?
The resources there, yes, definitely. And not just access to Asia through land, but also through the water. Yeah, the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, right? And that's actually what we're seeing today. Who knows what Yemen has done recently? Yeah.
Control of the cargo ships passing through.
Through where? Through the Red Sea, right? And so this. Oh yeah, and then they declared that they would continue to do that, right? And so that means that instead of passing through this area right here, I don't know the mouse was working. Right, like cargo ships would have to go all the way around Africa, right? And so this is why we see it was important to them then, and it continues to be important to them now. And so this is, I just want everyone to keep this in mind as we talk about these things moving forward.
Yeah, and on what Yemen is doing, it's applying economic pressure because it's going to cost a lot of money. There's a lot of money more on insurance now for boats because of the possibility of getting taken over by the Yemeni armed forces. And this just kind of underscores to us all that it's all about resources, it's all about capital, it's all about money. And then now this is why, for example, they decided to remove food aids for Yemen. So to get back to this is just to show that Palestine was part of this broader piece in the larger puzzle of Western domination of the region. Because the imperialist powers wanted access to Palestine for the strategic considerations we just talked about. And so they're all trying to think about the imperialists and the Zionists, how they can benefit one another in this time period, and how Palestine then became the perfect place for that. And we're going to talk a bit about this, alliance of mutual benefit, or the alliance of convenience, as some might call it. And I'll let.
Can I get someone actually to read this slide?
I can read it. Will all wear England in their hearts if through such a deed it becomes the protective power of the Jewish people? At one stroke, England will get 10 million secret but loyal subjects, active in all walks of life all over the world. At a signal, all of them will place themselves at the service of the magnanimous nation that brings long-desired help. England will get 10 million agents for her greatness and her influence, and the effect of this sort of thing usually spreads from the political to the economic.
They were much clearer back in the day.
Yeah, they tell us their intentions directly, right? And we're still told it's complicated, right? And so with this really, right, we're seeing, like I was saying, this relationship of mutual benefit and convenience come out of Zionism and imperial interests and capitalist interests. How do we define imperialism, by the way? Or how can we think of it here? You can use examples. If we think about it in this context, right? It's this this thirst for economic power and political domination, right? And knowing that within a certain place, like resources will eventually be finite, right? You'll eventually run out of more ways to gain capital, of more ways to dominate over other countries. And so you have to look for it elsewhere. You have to look for ways to dominate over other nations in order to secure those interests, in order to be the most capitalist of the capitalist countries, right? And so this is what we mean when we talk about imperialism, when we talk about British imperialism and Western imperialism, right? That they're using nations like Palestine for their own economic and political gain, right? And they have to go elsewhere to look for that. And so this quote by Theodor Herzl, who's cited as the founder of the Zionist movement, he's making it very clear their political and economic use of Zionism as to carry out the interests of imperialism. And again, we see this relationship becoming very structurally linked. And so materially, this meant that facilitating the settlement of European Zionists began well before the Nakba, right? If the British want to maintain their interest there, they're going to need more Europeans to settle there, right? And the Zionist movement says, well, I can think of people that can be there in order to secure both of our interests together, right? And we'll see later how this kind of changes as time goes by. But this is why also the British allocated resources to the Zionists and built settlement infrastructure, providing military protection there. So again, we're talking about all of this too in this period between 1917 and 1948, even though the Zionist movement itself started to take hold in the late 1800s, right? And then we see this relationship begin to develop. We also know from Herzl and others that Zionism wasn't even directly linked to Palestine, right? They actually considered other nations like Argentina to be and Uganda to be basically this host of the Zionist movement, right? And so again, we come back to this the ideas around this a religious conflict, right? Actually, that the religious piece is an additional kind of like convenient tool that they can use to further the argument. And so this is getting into that a little bit too as well, what we just talked about. So we really see the collusion of these reactionary forces together and using religion as kind of this scapegoat there. It's actually that a lot of Jewish people in this time period were against the Zionist movement because they said, no, if you seclude Jewish people into one nation and they're not integrating with other people, that's actually going to fuel anti-Semitism. That's not going to help our cause. And so, we see again a lot of pushback within that time period, and it really had to be kind of this relationship between colonialism and Zionism that supported the continued entrenchment of more and more Zionist settlements on Palestinian land. And so, again, at this point, Britain is thinking it will help them achieve their long-term goals and their control over the canal. What canal are we talking about? Suez. Yeah, and so British imperialism and Zionist colonialism, again, was this relationship of convenience and mutual need.
Yeah, the British kind of get off easy, right? People don't give them enough credit for what they did to Palestine. But with that, we're gonna get into sort of more of what Britain did pre-Nakba. So Britain's commitment to, can you guys all hear me?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm scared that's annoying. Okay. Britain's commitment to making the Zionist state possible in Palestine necessitated the mass dispossession of Palestinians from 1917 to 1948. So while we know that the Nakba entailed mass dispossession, the Nakba of 1948, we need to understand that the dispossession occurred before 1948 and was made possible in the period before 1948 through policies, rules, and violence that the British supported or instituted. By 1935, 1/5 of Palestinians who comprised traditionally agrarian, like they worked in the fields and the sides in the countryside, had been rendered landless. And the land was their source of life at that point. And so um, is it too quiet?
No, I just wanted to interfere with you.
Oh, no, it's fine, it's fine. I was just worried that my P's were in the.
Oh, no, you're good. Sorry.
That's okay. So, yeah, so 1/5 of Palestinians were rendered landless. And so dispossession from the land, what happened was, it happened through various means, including British economic regime imposing taxes on Palestinians at a really high cost to try to expropriate, to take over Palestinian wealth and redirect the Palestinian wealth into developing the British colonial project. So they would collect taxes. The British instituted a money economy in the countryside, which didn't exist prior, and so it forced Palestinian peasants to borrow money at really high interest, like low interest rates or exploitative rates from money lenders. And so the outcome basically of these taxation policies was devastating, and it resulted in Palestinians becoming really in debt, having no land, and having really high levels of unemployment. And because of these three factors, Palestinian peasants were then driven off of their land into cities where the job market was heavily favored in support of incoming Zionist settlers that were, slowly coming in, facilitated by the British. The British even had Palestinians, they forced Palestinian prisoners to build the railways, like the British Railway Company. It had huge railway systems, and they forced Palestinians, specifically in camps like Nur Shams and Tul Karam and around Jenin, to build, same places where we see now a lot of, tension, had them building these railway systems, forced labor as prisoners in order to build the Zionist state, essentially. And so as the British occupation was making Palestinians indebted and landless, it was developing the Zionist, the infrastructure of the Zionist state. And one particularly important aspect to do with this question of resources had to do with discussion of resources and infrastructure development. For example, the British granted a Zionist man called Pinchas Rutenberg the rights to construct the biggest electricity generating station, called the Palestine Electric Company, in the country. And this station was used to develop Zionist settlements, but not Palestinian neighborhoods or villages. But this is happening way before 1948. And another example was a British Zionist collaboration of extracting salt from the Dead Sea, and then setting up of a modern transportation and road system, which were given to Zionist capitalists to develop exclusively. And then during World War II, when the British wanted to expand their police and military project in Palestine, it gave most of these contracts to Jewish employers, incoming Zionist settlers. So it was through this dispossession and through this, kind of resource extraction and unequal distribution that a shared Palestinian identity was being formed as this exploitation occurred through national exclusion at the hands of these imperialists and these colonialists. And then this would then shape the form of the struggle that the Palestinian resistance would take. So it's important for us to know that this was not merely a struggle about wages for Palestinian workers or worker rights or equality. It's instead it's about national liberation, and this is the same thing now. It's not about equality. It's not about reformation or any of these things. It's about national liberation, self-determination, and sovereignty over land and resources. So it's this violent process of colonization is how the Palestinian struggle became synthesized as the national liberation struggle and the anti-imperialist struggle that it is today. And at the helm of this struggle was the Palestinian peasantry and the working class. And so this brings us to the Great Arab Revolution, the Great Arab Revolt, or the Great Peasant Revolt, as it's sometimes called, which is a really important and fascinating period in the history. I won't be able to go into it into a lot of detail because we're trying to get 100 years in. We're still there's only like in the 30s, so don't worry, it's all really interesting. We have like videos and stuff like that. So this anti-imperialist struggle and for national liberation reached its peak in 1936, which with the start of the Great Arab Revolt. Many historians refer to this as the largest anti-colonial revolution against the British colonizers, across all of their colonies, as I mentioned earlier. And although the conditions for the outbreak of this moment, like landlessness, dispossession, incoming Zionist settlers, labor exploitations, all of these things I just talked about. Although these conditions were already in place and in the making for decades, the immediate spark of the revolution was the martyrdom of a great imam called Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam. The name might sound familiar. Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam was a towering figure in Palestinian history, and particularly in the history of Palestinian resistance. And his name is honored to this day in the naming of the military wing of the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. And what's really important is here to highlight that al-Qassam's approach was a total inversion of that of the Palestinian elite at the time. We didn't get too much into the role of the Palestinian elite, but suffice it to say they were, we'll talk about it more when we talk about Oslo, but they were colluding for their interest with the British and appealing to the British colonizers, thinking that they could appeal to the British colonizers to help them, overcome Zionist settlers, not knowing that, not knowing, but not, really taking into account the fact that the relationship between the Zionists and the imperialists was, one and the same. And so, we see this like appealing to the British colonizers, trying to get them to adopt, change policies or listen to what the elite is doing. But instead, al-Qassam's approach and that of the peasantry was to struggle against Zionism and believing that it's inseparable from opposition to British rule, seeing the way that they're interlinked and seeing the way that they're building each other up. And it also rejected the route of negotiation that was adopted by the Palestinian elite, and also emphasized the necessity of armed revolution that was led by the Arab and Palestinian working class. Because actually in the revolt, we see there are a lot of Arabs from across the region coming into Palestine to join the revolution. And Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam was actually a Syrian, and he came to Palestine to after fighting the French colonizers in Syria, when he was kicked out, and he came to Palestine to fight the British colonizers. So al-Qassam's significance is in the different path that he drew, that he believed the struggle against Zionism, as I said, was inseparable from opposing British rule, and it was his martyrdom that kind of made the path of armed struggle and this revolutionary path irreversible. And although they tried, there was no amount of collaboration with the elites could really undermine this revolutionary path. And just to kind of close off a little bit, today the Zionist state, what's important about this period is the Zionist state reproduces a narrative about the Great Revolt for those who even hear about it, that it was kind of sporadic, it was unorganized, it was terroristic, things we hear till this day. And we know that this is not true, and this is just part of a Zionist policies aimed at not just forcibly suppressing memories of our revolutions, but also ideologically ruining them and denigrating them, denigrating these symbols of national resistance. And the Zionist depiction of this revolution to this day as unorganized banditry, as criminals, is nothing short of imperialist and Zionist propaganda, and ignores the fact that for 3 whole years, the British were faced with the largest anti-colonial revolution of the interwar period, so the period between World War I and World War II, that nearly brought the colonial powers to their knees. So, can I have someone read this quote? You can just like say it loud if you want. Maybe someone in the front. Go ahead.
In the whole history of the Palestinian struggle with the armed popular revolt was never closer to victory than in the months between the end of 1937 and the beginning of 1939. In this period, the British forces' control of Palestine weakened, the prestige of colonialism was at its lowest, and the reputation and influence of the revolt became the principal force in the country. Hassan Kanafani.
So Hassan Kanafani has a really beautiful, one of the first pieces on the history of this revolt, if people are interested in learning more. So the actual revolution began in April of 1936 when Qassamites, who are the men who followed Din al-Qassam, attacked a convoy of trucks between Nablus and Tulkarem, which is the British used to call it the Triangle of Terror because of the amount of resistance activities that would occur in the triangle between Nablus, Tulkarem, and Jenin. And so this represented the beginning of the revolution's first phase, which formally began with a nationwide general strike called on May 8th, which lasted for 6 months and was accompanied by an armed revolution from the countryside. So the strike brought the commercial and private sector to a standstill and had popular support across all of Palestine. And at the same time, the strike created popular committees and bodies which would become integral to sustaining both the strike and the armed component. And we're actually going to see similar tactics used in the first Intifada. And so, oftentimes the strike is thought about as separate from the armed struggle component and, different or diverging tactics. But, actually they're part of a unified strategy between the urbanites, the people who lived in the cities, and the peasants to combine tactics for a nationwide strike with armed insurrection, which began, like I said, in 1936. So we have a quick little video.
Does the sound work? It's okay. We can imagine the sound.
Some old
No,
songs.
it's a silent film.
This is basically showing. This clip is from a show. I don't know if people have watched. Taghrib al-Palestiniya, yeah. And basically, it's showing what I was just recounting, right? This attack on the convoy of British soldiers in the Triangle of Terror, as they refer to it.
So the ones in the car, the trucks are the British, and you see how they have these.
Where was this? In Palestine?
This was in between Nablus and Tulkarem on the road. Yeah, this was in 1936 in April. I mean, these aren't this isn't real footage. It's a recreation.
It's iPhone 1.
You see the organized, Qassamites in the hills around. And they're calling for backup here.
And the other piece too, I think we've referenced, but the peasantry and the people of the land, that they're recognizing that the British are also, are part and parcel of the enemy. They are the enemy as well, just as much as Zionist settlers. So I think that's the other piece here that is important to remember that as different interests start to converge and things like that, the workers and the peasantry have always kind of seen this clear path of who's stepping on their rights regardless.
See if that works. No.
Yeah. Oh, it's another video.
I'll show. Yeah. So
Yeah. So just another video. I'll just give quick context behind it. So like I said. Oh yeah. So before we play the video, just to go off of the video we just watched now. So yeah, as we were saying, the organization, it's clear that these revolutionaries are organized, and they employ tactics that weaken the colonial imperial project. And the revolt was decentralized, but organized at the same time. And it's a model of organizing that some have compared to that of the Vietnamese guerrilla fighters. So these formations were loosely interconnected, and they used flexible tactics while operating with mass support across Palestine. Okay, so we'll go into this video now quickly.
On the other hand, and on the other hand, this is a video kind of showing the British and how they're thinking about this.
And when you watch this, think about similar tactics designed.
Hitherto in this series, we have shown you Palestine in its happier mood. Today we bring to the screen the reason for the sense of security enjoyed by the thousands of Jewish immigrants, the British troops, ever watchful, ever protective. Tommy Atkins finds little time for recreation, and even this may well be interrupted at the call of duty. These pictures come from Karen and Naples, probably the most disturbed districts of the country, which, however, under the watchful eyes of the British, are now comparatively calm. Reported trouble in an outlying district. Away dashed the Royal Artillery and the Green Hides, equipped with all the latest gear designed to inspire respect in hearts of terrorists for law and order. Peace once more, and the boys come home to watch and wait for any other spawn bomb. Sailor.
Okay. Yeah, so again, we see, they mentioned, the British troops there, and the British brought in about 20,000 troops to suppress the revolution and the Arab revolts that we just talked about. So again, why are the British investing so many resources in troops there? Are they actually worried for people's safety?
No.
No, they're trying to do what? Protect their interests in the region, exactly, right? And so, again, just continuing to see this, and we see it to this day, setting up troops and wherever they want to protect their interests or keep a hand on, right? So again, this was not without, the Arab revolts are not without, repression that came lashing down on Palestinians. And again, think about these things even to today. These are the same type of tactics that we're seeing. The British employed an array of suppression tactics against the revolt to crush its popular national bases of support. And this including things like mass fining, searching. I don't know if you saw in the clip, but they stopped the young boy with his donkey. Again, it's like checkpoints, it's just recirculating, right? They were extracting free labor from villagers on infrastructure projects, forcing prisoners to build roads, chain gangs, punitive police posts, and road restrictions. They were censoring them. They employed curfews and really just nationwide tactics of collective punishment. And they'd often search the villages and then detain all the young men in cages. And throughout the revolt, they built even more prisons, cages, and camps, and used them as free labor, right? So again, it's not only about repressing, but then they're like, we're going to repress and imprison these people and force them to do our labor to further embed our infrastructure, right? Our colonial infrastructure. And so, imprisonment and repression rates were so high that some statistics claim that by 1939, at least 10% of Palestine's male population was either dead, imprisoned, or in exile. And again, this is 1939. We're not even at 1948 yet. So again, these are some of the things we see here. The offenses of sabotage or terrorism, or suspected terrorism, and so on and so on and so forth. So this is what I was just mentioning, that by 1939, estimated about 10% of the male population. And just to read off this quote as well, which was by Moshe Dayan, the Zionist war criminal who learned from the British general Ord, Wingate, whatever. Right, so he says, in some sense, every leader of the Israeli army, even today, is a disciple of Wingate, the British general. He gave us our technique, he was the inspiration of our tactics, he was our dynamic. So again, a lot of the things that we're seeing now are just are recycled tactics.
This is just on a side note, if you've ever had Zionists say things like, we fought, a war of national liberation, or like our independence when 1948 was our independence from the British. I don't know what kind of Zionists that you've spoken to, but there have been some who've said that. There are many who say that. They view theirs like they were independent from the British. Because the British limited at one point the settlement of Zionists, around the 1939 because of the Great Arab Revolt. And so the Zionists were unhappy and so started attacking some British forces. But I mean, this just goes to show how absurd the claim is that they were, fighting the British. The British were literally like their dad, like setting things up for them.
Yeah, and so, but just as there is continuity in these tactics of the British Zionist tactics of repression and imprisonment, these forces of reaction that we're seeing, there's also continuity in our people's resistance that continues to haunt the Zionist occupier till this day. And our people fight to preserve and revive this history and resist its erasure. Precisely because it's not just history, but it's what's happening right now before our very eyes. It's part of an ongoing struggle for national liberation against Zionism and imperialism, and in opposition to the collaboration positions of the Palestinian elite. So, with that being said, again, we discussed this history of the revolts and so on. Throughout this time period, now going into the 40s, again, the kind of entrenchment of Zionist infrastructure is being built more and more and more, and we're building up to this moment of 1948, or what's referred to as the Nakba, the catastrophe. And so,
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
Who helped arm the resistance, the Qassamites?
That's a good question. I actually don't know 100% sure, but there's a story of in a Syrian the Mitran Capucci, who was like the Archbishop of Jerusalem at the time during the Nakba. He was one of the guys who was smuggling weapons from Lebanon and Syria into Palestine. Arab revolutionaries all over the world were trying to smuggle, were smuggling weapons, through various means. The Archbishop was a good way because he had less, scrutiny on him. I think also there were weapons some Palestinians had. Some Palestinians had even fought in force for the British, or for the Ottomans, sorry. And so there were weapons that they had from then. But it's a good question that probably you could do more research on it. How's everyone doing? Is it good? There's a lot. But the next sections are a bit less dense, and you probably know some of these things. It'll be more exciting. But yeah, stop us if we're going too fast or too slow.
Okay, so again, this alliance that we've been talking about between the British and the Zionists, this was